I stood in the snow outside my son's estate, clutching a handmade gift packed with memories from our years together. The door eased open, and Adam, my only boy, the one I'd poured everything into, spoke without warmth. "Sorry, Dad, this is a private event." Laughter rolled out from inside, and not a soul among them understood what I was about to do next. What I said would freeze the whole celebration, and that was only the beginning. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling us where you're listening from. The chime of the bell faded under the thump of holiday jazz, just a small ripple against the bright noise spilling from Adam's place. Snow peppered my coat, and the worn scarf at my neck hung heavy with damp. In my hands, the photo album, its leather rubbed smooth by years of touch felt denser than it should, as if the weight of time had settled into the binding. I'd spent weeks on it, every page a stitch of our history. Adam's first bike ride, early fishing trips, Laura's smile caught mid-laughter and forever stilled. My breath fogged the air, sharp and bitter in the December cold, and my fingers nicked and calloused from work that rarely made the papers curled tight around the spine, like it might anchor me to the moment. I pressed the bell again. The door cracked and Adam's face appeared, tie loose, eyes impatient. "Dad?" His voice had the clipped tone of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "What are you doing here?" I lifted the album, its ribbon curling like a question mark. "Brought you something. For Christmas." He glanced over his shoulder, chandeliers flashing off his cufflinks like distant lightning. "Sorry, Dad, it's a private gathering." The words landed hard cold and final, like a shovel striking frozen ground. "Private?" I stepped in, snow crunching under my boots. "No room for your old man?" Megan slid in behind him, silk dress shimmering, smile taut. "Frank, we didn't want to trouble you." "It's just colleagues," she added, perfectly composed. Her gaze flicked to the album and away again, as if it were a trinket from a flea market, instead of the map of a life. My chest pinched, but my voice held steady. "Trouble me? Adam? When's the last time we— Not now." He began to shut the door, hand firm on the brass. I caught it with my boot, the album pressed to my ribs like a shield I hadn't planned on using. "Not now? When, then?" My voice rose sharper than I meant, slicing through the music. Somewhere inside, the laughter thinned. Adam's jaw tightened. "Dad, please, don't make a scene." A scene. That word stung and pulled up a reel of years' late nights, over drawings and ledgers, the house I sold to float his startup, the sacrifices that never made it into anyone's toast. I saw it as clearly as a photograph. Adam at 25, shaking my hand in the lawyer's office, eyes bright with promises. "We'll build something together, Dad." I believed him, signed away the home Laura and I had made, all for his future. For ours, I told myself. Now, standing in the drifting snow, I felt the weight of that lie settle across my shoulders. My knuckles went white on the album. "A scene," I said. Lower now, but sharp. "No, Adam, I'm not the one hiding." Before he could answer, I stepped past him. The door swung wide on quiet hinges. Warmth slammed into me. Cinnamon and wine, polished wood, and crystal prisms scattering light over velvet drapes. Heads turned, and the chatter faded as I stood in the foyer, my boots printing wet coins on the marble. A little girl peeked from the staircase, braids swinging, unseen by adults cradling their glasses like precious things. Megan hovered a hand near Adam's arm, her pearls throwing tiny stars. "Frank, really, this isn't—" I raised the album, my voice carrying clean to the back. "Evening, folks. I'm Frank Miller, Adam's father." The silence grew thick, every eye on me, some curious, some embarrassed, a few already defensive on his behalf, because success does that to people. On a side table, half hidden by an extravagant bouquet, a framed photo of Laura sat with her familiar smile, a ghost peering out of this glittering cage. Adam came forward, face a careful mask. "Dad, let's go outside and talk." I didn't move. The album felt like a makeshift shield, heavy with truths these strangers would never know if I didn't speak. A woman in a red dress tilted her head, studying me as though my name might spark a memory. My heart hammered, but I stood tall. What could I tell a room that hadn't lived any of it? A glass clicked against marble, sharp as a dropped pin. I remained center stage in Adam's mansion, the album firm in my hands, its weight keeping me grounded while the guests' gazes pressed like a tide. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and expensive perfume, but all I saw was the damp trail my boots left across the floor. The child on the staircase had disappeared, and her absence tugged at me more than it should have. I set the album on a mahogany table, its plain cover stark amid the silver candelabras and the curated opulence. Frank Miller? A man's voice edged in, warm, curious. He stepped forward in a tweed jacket that sat slightly at odds with the tailored suits around him. I'm Daniel Brooks, Riverbend University. Didn't you lead the old depot restoration back in '99? Murmurs moved like small waves through the room. I straightened, more surprised than I let on. That was a long time ago, I said, steadier than I felt. Long time. You saved that building, Daniel said, eyes lighting. His wine was forgotten in his hand. The beams were tired, the foundation failing. They said it was a teardown. You found another way. I looked at Adam, who arranged a smile and tapped his watch like a metronome, marking the time I'd already overstayed. Megan leaned close and whispered something that glittered but didn't glow. Attention shifted toward me, and a thread of pride I hadn't worn in years pulled straight. I had a good crew, I said, keeping even. We restored half of Cedar Falls' historic district in those years. A scene from that time pushed up Adam at 16, trailing me through mud and sawdust. I'd spread plans across a sawhorse and showed him how to read the marks. See, son, every beam is a story. He'd grinned like sunrise, and for a breath, I believed we'd build more than buildings together. Half of Cedar Falls? A woman in sapphire whispered to her husband, the words carrying. Heads nodded and the room's edge softened, curiosity nudging out disdain. Adam cleared his throat and stepped into the light again. Let's talk about the future, not old projects, he said with a smoothness he wore like a suit. Our company's closing a major deal tonight. His eyes slid to me, wary. Megan chimed in, bright as a lightning strike and just as brief. Exactly. We're expanding to Chicago next quarter. She gestured to a caterer who rushed forward with glittering canapes, as if food could blot out history. I let their words float and fall, my gaze drawing back to the album, its simple lines against so much shine, reminding me that substance rarely demands attention. Old work built this town, I said, soft but firm. The room stilled again as if the building itself wanted to hear. Daniel nodded slowly, respect waking in his features, and the weight of the stairs shifted, no longer pitying, not entirely protective of Adam anymore. An older couple whispered about the depot and how it still smelled faintly of cedar in the winter. Megan's fingers fussed at her necklace. The pearls slid and clicked, like a beaded abacus tallying cost. Adam's smile slipped for a breath and returned with effort. They hadn't expected this pivot. Daniel edged closer, voice lowered, a conspirator in visible daylight. There's more to that story, isn't there? A spark lit his eyes, like he knew something waiting to be said. The room's hum softened, breaths held, glasses pausing midair. What did he know that I didn't? Daniel lifted his voice, cleanly cutting the hush. You didn't hear about the Cedar Falls Heritage Prize, did you, Frank? The room buzzed, faces turned. I gripped the edge of the table, fingers pressing into polished wood. The album's ribbon had curled loose. A quiet witness. Prize, I said, and it sounded unfamiliar in my mouth. Wind rattled the patio doors, the storm outside less threatening than the one forming inside. Daniel nodded, brow furrowed. The Heritage Prize for preserving the history of Cedar Falls. It carried a $50,000 grant. They tried to reach you last spring, but... His glance bounced to Adam and Megan. They were told you were unavailable. The room shifted like a deck under a sudden wave. Unavailable? I saw it clearly. A letter I'd never received, a red seal bright and tidy, addressed to me but delivered to Adam's mailbox. I'd been living above their garage, then sorting bills and memories, trusting them to pass along my mail the way I'd passed along experience and faith. My gut twisted. They'd intercepted it, buried it. Daniel leaned closer, voice dropping to something that traveled well despite its softness. The committee sent the letter to Adam's address, your temporary contact. They got a reply from Megan stating you weren't interested. I checked with the secretary. The signature was hers. Adam coughed and splashed wine over his cuff. Dad, we didn't want to stress you. You'd been tired. The wobble in his voice wasn't tenderness. It was calculation coming unglued. Megan stepped in, measured and smooth as polished stone. We thought it was too much for him with everything going on. She poured from a decanter. Her hand trembled, just enough to prove she was human. Whispers rippled, half-felt wind around the room. An older man in a gray suit looked at me with a kind of searching sorrow. A woman in velvet said softly, "That isn't right." The air tightened, every glance finding its target and changing shape when it landed. I looked at Adam and Megan, their faces bright under the chandelier. Every facet catching light, none of it real. You thought? My voice was low, but it carried. You decided for me. My fingers twitched toward the album. I needed the leather, the paper, the proof of heartbeat in years. They'd taken more than a house in trust. They'd tried to bury a legacy. Daniel pressed on, maybe unaware of how deep he'd cut, or maybe knowing full well. The committee was stunned. They said your work inspired a generation, he added gently, as if it might set a broken limb. The kindness in it didn't blunt the betrayal's edge. I closed my eyes and saw the letter again, perfect in my mind, never in my hands. I'd been in that garage room then, sorting Laura's old sketches, unaware of the honor waiting to be claimed. Adam had dropped by once, tossed a stack of junk mail on my table, said nothing important. I believed him and slid the pile aside like I'd slid aside needs that didn't seem urgent. Now, the room's attention pinned Adam and Megan like moths to a board. A woman with a notebook reporter, I guessed, scribbled so fast the pen sounded like a zipper. Megan's smile froze. The glass in her hand trembled. Adam tugged at his tie, confidence cracking along a fine seam. I looked at the album again, its pages a ledger of a life they'd discounted. Resolve settled in me then, solid as winter wind. The reporter's eyes found mine, question replacing pity. Could I stand the story upright and let it walk on its own legs? Adam lifted his glass, smile stretched thin, and called for attention. Conversation dwindled. The fireplace crackled in the elbow of the room. I stood near the table, fingertips on a chair's carved back, feeling the wood's cool certainty. The reporter hovered, notepad raised, gaze skipping between Adam and me as if choosing which thread to follow. The air went heavy, the moment before a summer storm that never quite breaks until it does. Everyone? Adam said, smooth voice hiding an edge. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a misunderstanding. He looked at me, eyes going soft in a way that never reached his mouth. My father hasn't been himself. Stress, retirement, losing Mom. We've been worried. The words landed like cold water down the back of the neck. Worried? I straightened while the old ache in my jaw woke up. Guests shifted, heels clicked, eyes moved, some soft with sympathy, some sharpening like knives. Megan stepped closer, emerald earrings catching the chandelier. We only want what's best for Frank, she said, concern hanging on her voice like an ornament on a thin branch. Her fingers twisted a bracelet tell I'd learned to read long ago. Best for me? My voice slipped through, clean and sharp. I'm right here, Adam. Clear as day. I stepped forward. My worn soles scuffed the polish, and for a heartbeat, everything waited. Adam's practiced smile faltered and then returned. Dad, you're exaggerating. That prize thing was a mix-up. Let's get you home. You need rest. He gestured to the door like a man offering an exit and not an exile. Home. The word burned. It called up the narrow room over their garage where I'd counted pennies to make a medical bill disappear after a bad fall. I'd phoned Adam one rainy night, asked for help. I'll take care of it, Dad, he'd said, casual, distant. The help didn't come. I sold the old watch Laura gave me, band worn soft, and paid it myself. I took out my wallet now, leather cracked, a faded photo of Laura tucked inside like a talisman. Rest? I said, letting the photo catch the light. I've rested plenty. While you built all this, I tipped a hand toward the drapes and the glass and the plates that looked like you needed a license to hold them. I trusted you. That was my mistake? A woman near the piano gasped softly. An older man in tweed looked at Adam with a doubt that had weight. The reporter scratched at the page, lines piling up. Megan's bracelet stopped its orbit. Frank, please, Megan said, voice tight. We're family. Let's not do this here. She moved to guide me outward. I lifted a hand and she stopped where she was. I'm not leaving, I said. The ceiling held my voice and sent it back. You invited these folks to celebrate your success. Let them know who floated it. The words hung, simple and heavy. Adam's glass shook slightly. Red touched the rim. A guest in sapphire whispered, Is he telling the truth? The doubt in her eyes wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the story she'd been handed when she accepted the invitation. What if I could flip their script? The front door swung open and a gust of cold carried a bright ribbon of air into the hall. Nora Hayes stepped inside, crimson scarf vivid against her gray coat. Heads turned, glasses paused mid-sip. Her silver hair struck the chandelier's light and tossed it back. She held a small box tied with twine simple, stubbornly out of place among all the shine. I stood by the table with my wallet, Adam's narrative still rattling like a window in wind. Her eyes found mine, widened at the tension stamped across the room. Frank? Nora's voice cut clean and warm through the murmur. She crossed to me, boots clicking softly, and squeezed my arm. A lifeline I hadn't expected. I didn't know you'd be here tonight. Nora, I managed, throat tight. It's been a night. Her presence steadied the ground under me. She turned to the room with an easy poise that came from standing in rooms like this without ever believing in them more than necessary. I'm Nora Hayes, project director, she said. I came to share some news with Frank. She paused, and her smile was bright without being brittle. I'm leading the reconstruction of the Cedar Falls Historic Center, a $1.2 million contract, and I want Frank Miller as my partner. The room stirred, scattered applause rose. An older man lifted his glass and nodded as if happening upon a truth he'd been waiting for. Adam shifted, tie crooked now. Megan's smile lost its shape. The reporter leaned forward, pen galloping. Partner? Adam's voice was clipped, uneasy. Dad's retired, Nora. He's not up for that. Nora laughed a soft, certain sound. Retired? Frank helped rebuild this town's backbone. He's exactly who I need. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the summer we'd sketched a community center on a pier, with gulls arguing overhead and hope arguing for us. We were young, in love, and then Life Laura, my work. Nora's travel pulled at the seams. Nora, I started, voice catching. I don't know what to say. Say yes, she said simply. Her hand stayed on my arm, steady as a promise. The room leaned in, a single body made of many people. A woman in velvet whispered, They're perfect together. And for once I didn't flinch from what other people thought. Megan cleared her throat, too bright by half. That sounds lovely, but Frank's been unwell. We wouldn't want to overburden him. The veil on the words was so thin it was practically see-through. Guests' faces said they'd begun to see through it already. I met Nora's gaze and let her certainty shore up my own. I'm not overburdened, I said, voice steady. I'm ready. It felt like a vow to her, to me. Nora's smile reached her eyes and lit them. The twined little box hummed with promise. What else did she bring into this room that wasn't on any guest list? She reached into her purse and drew out a velvet pouch, the kind that always looks as if it must hide something older than the person who holds it. She opened it, and the brass key inside threw a small star of light. The hall hushed. The violinist's bow hovered. Every eye turned. My heart thudded. Adam and Megan sat rigid with their glasses untouched. The crowd leaned forward because some moments insist on witnesses. Frank, she said, warm, deliberate. This is for you. She set the key in my palm, its ridges faintly etched like waves. The seaside cottage we dreamed about 30 years ago, it's yours now. A stake in the Historic Center project and a home. Applause broke open, sharp and clean. A woman in gold gasped, "That's so romantic." My fingers closed around the key and shook. A home. A future. Nora, I faltered. "It's more than I deserve." "You deserve it all," she said. "Say yes." Adam's chair scraped as he stood, voice tight. "That's generous, Nora." But Dad settled here with us. His knuckles went pale on his glass. His smile was a shell that couldn't hold water anymore. Megan added, honey sweet. "We've been looking after him. A cottage might be too much." Her fingers clutched her necklace. The pearls lay against her throat like ice laid out to shine. The room ignored them. Murmurs rose. Excited, relieved, alive. An older man clapped, "Incredible." Frank, "Lucky man." The reporter's pen scribbled and scribbled. I held the key, the cool metal pinning me to something suddenly solid. Nora and I, years ago, had stood in front of that cottage with the salt staining the shingles and the wind fussing in our hair. The waves crashed and she laughed, and we drew our future as if drawing could make it happen. One day, she'd said. I believed her then. I believed her now. "Nora," I said, voice clean with decision. "I'm in." A door seemed to swing wide and bright in the room. Cheers rose, a tide lifting. Adam's face darkened. He glanced at Megan as if she could hand him a way out. "Dad, we can discuss this later," he said low, nearly pleading. "There's nothing to discuss," I answered, sliding the key into my pocket. Its weight was a promise and a rebirth. Nora's hand grazed mine, steady warmth. Applause softened, but Adam's stare cut like the wind that snakes under doors when they don't quite fit. The place buzzed, and still I saw only him. Fear and calculation trading places in his eyes. A cold draft made the chandelier tremble. What would they try next? Adam's shadow flickered in a side hallway where the gold filigree wallpaper caught the glow of his phone. I lingered by the buffet, chatter a dull wash, watching him pace with his head bent and his voice a wire drawn thin. The smell of mulled wine hovered, while wilting greens on a platter told the truth about a party losing its shine. I set my hand on the album and let the leather cool me. Megan stood near the curtain, half hidden, nodding into the blue light from Adam's screen. I edged closer along the marble until the chill crept into my soles. I caught a few words. "He's not stable," could derail the project. My chest tightened. They were building a scaffold from lies and hoping no one would jump on it to shake it down. Before I spoke, Daniel reappeared, his tweed rumpled, his eyes loaded with news he didn't want. He tugged me toward a window frosted with breath-like patterns. "Frank," he whispered. I heard Adam on the phone. "He's telling an investor you're unwell, saying you'll sabotage Nora's work." Megan's backing him up. The words hit like a hammer. I ran my thumb along the edge of my old watch to steady myself. The time had always been there, whether or not I looked at it. "They're scared," I said even, not loud. "Nora's offer changes everything." Daniel nodded, jaw set. "They're desperate. That investor's the hinge for their expansion. Discredit you, control the story." I reached into my coat and pulled out my battered engineering notebook, the one with the neat drawings that meant more to me than all the suits in the room. They thought they could erase me. I remembered the narrow winter night over the garage, my phone lighting up my palm as I left the voicemails that got no echo. The heater hummed, the ceiling stained and honest in a way people often aren't. "They're wrong," I told Daniel. "I'm not the one slipping." He squeezed my shoulder. "I know, but they're swinging hard." "What's your move?" I let my eyes rest on Adam. Still pacing Megan, chewing her lip, the red smudging. A guest dropped a napkin and didn't notice. The party had shrunk into something like a waiting room for news they didn't want to hear. The quiet of their scheming lay heavy across everything. "I'm going to show them exactly who I am," I said. The notebook warmed in my hands. Inside were streets and spans and beams. I knew like the lines on my own palm. Cedar Falls laid out like a map of my past and a blueprint for my future. Across the room, Nora's red scarf flashed. Her gaze found me and held steady. An idea sharpened, clean and surprising as a winter star. What truth could I offer that they hadn't planned for? Steam blurred the cafe window as I stepped inside later, the scent of coffee washing away the sour note the party had left in me. Beams of old timber glowed honey brown. The barista hummed a carol while cups clicked their small rhythm. I had left the mansion an hour earlier, Adam's latest round still sparking in my mind. Nora and Daniel waited at a corner table with a map of Cedar Falls spread between them like a picnic cloth for the hungry. "Frank?" Nora said, warm and sure. "You look ready." Her sketchbook was already open pages of lines and light. Daniel's notebook lay half filled with bullet points and underlines that added up to a plan. I slid into the chair and shrugged off my coat. "I am," I said, pulling the map closer. "Adam's smearing me with an investor. We need to move fast, show the council I'm the right fit." "Not with noise, with work." Daniel tapped his pen. "The council respects you, Frank. But can we tilt them before the rumors set?" "We can," I said, tracing streets and corners with a fingertip. "I still know people, old colleagues, historians. I'll put together a presentation that can stand without me talking. And I'll talk anyway. The lines promised a way forward and a path after too many days waiting for a knock that didn't come." Nora nodded and sketched the historic center's outline cleanly, like she'd been drawing around its ghost for months and could finally see the body. "You're right for this, Frank. Your work lives in these streets." Her admiration warmed me more than the cafe heater. I saw another winter late 90s, a crowd with homemade signs, rain-streaking letters until the slogans turned to watercolor. I'd stood on a pallet and explained footing and shoring and how we could lift the sagging hall without breaking its back. They'd cheered not because they believed me, but because they believed in us. "What about the details?" Daniel asked, practical as a level on a beam. "Timelines? Budgets?" "I'll handle the engineering specifics," I said, feeling the old muscles flex. "Nora design and public boards, Daniel letters of support from Riverbend and the Historical Society. We'll make the case so clear they can't find the fog." "Done," Daniel said, scribbling. Nora glanced up, her hand brushing the map. "We're a team again," she said, soft, certain. The cafe door chimed. Winter air rushed in, then stilled. A flyer on the corkboard caught my eye, a council member's name I knew from long-ago committees. My heart gave a simple, useful thud. This could tilt the whole table the right way. Could this be the key? The weeks that followed blurred the edges of the calendar. I spent late nights over old drawings and newer calculations, refining the plan until it felt like it had always been there, waiting to be revealed. Nora finalized boards and models that married grace and grit. Daniel secured letters from historians who'd been teaching my work without my knowing they remembered my name. A council colleague found us a hearing date that came sooner than anyone expected. By January 2025, we were ready to stand in a room where the walls love their town. In the mirror of my cramped room, I tightened a tie and watched some of the past loosen its hold. Today, I thought, we take the town back from the story that shrank it. My voice rang clean against oak in the council chamber. Notes fanned beside me. Stained glass scattered color across the floor, like confetti that was too well behaved to make a mess. Council members, neighbors, reporters' faces turned toward me with that look people get when they're weighing whether to risk hope. Behind me, the plan glowed on the screen lines and spans. I knew better than the lines in my own hands. "This reconstruction," I said, "will keep the heart of Cedar Falls beating for generations." It was January 2025, and I was claiming what I'd almost let slip away. The room hummed as I laid out the plan, my structural know-how woven through Nora's design and Daniel's backing. A young reporter lifted her camera and caught me mid-sentence, in a way I knew would make me look more certain than I felt. Adam and Megan sat toward the back rigid statues that cast long shadows. Her scarf slid and she fussed at it. He leaned forward, chin on fist, a pose I'd seen him use when he wanted to look thoughtful for photographers. Their presence was a draft under the door. But I stood and let the light fall where it would. This is more than buildings, I said, palm open. It's our story, our pride. A council member leaned forward. Her lenses sent a small star of light toward me, as if she was aiming acceptance like a signal. I thought of the garage loft nights budgeting a pension by the inch, the lamp tracing cracks like fault lines across the paint. That Frank was gone. This one could afford to meet his own eyes in the morning. Applause came not thunder, but firm. A member stood and said clearly, "Mr. Miller, you've done Cedar Falls proud. We're with you." The room murmured agreement, a vibration I felt in the planks. Adam cleared his throat thinly. "It's one project, let's not overstate." But the sound folded under the crowd's warmth. Megan smiled like glass and looked toward the exit as if the air would be easier to breathe in the hall. As I stepped down, a reporter pressed a newly printed article into my hand. "Local builder reclaims legacy," the headline said. It told the story of my work and the Heritage Prize that had been swallowed by silence. Truth in black and white has a way of hardening into something you can lay a beam on. A draft slipped along the chamber's back edge and found a way to my skin. "Frank," Nora whispered, hand on my arm. "You were magnificent." Daniel's grin told the same story from the other side of the room. People gathered with congratulations that didn't topple me, because I'd learned how to plant my feet again. I scanned the article and saw Adam's smile caught in a small photo at the back of the room, strained off balance. When his gaze met mine across the people, I saw fear in it, or desperation. Maybe both. What would they risk now that their masks wouldn't hold? The cold greeted me just outside the chamber. The headline folded into my coat pocket, the ink still smelling faintly like machinery. Reporters tried to feed me questions, but I let them fly past. My legs carried me toward the quiet I needed more than I needed quotes. Back at the rented room, an envelope leaned out of the mailbox, a law firm's crest catching the light like a dare. Inside, under the lamp's steady circle, I read words that accused me of exploiting Adam and Megan's generosity and demanded I withdraw from Nora's project. I folded the letter sharply. The paper's edge bit my finger and drew a pinprick of blood I pressed against my palm until it faded. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked at nothing that trustworthy kind of alarm. January 2025 felt colder than the thermometer could explain. I set the letter down, rolled my sleeves, and reached for my fountain pen, a scratched, stubborn thing that had outlasted flashier tools. I wrote one word at the top of my pad: proof. They were scrambling, throwing shadows at a wall, and hoping the wall would fall for it. A knock brought me to the door. Margaret stood there, a council member I'd known long enough to know she didn't come without reason. Snow dusted her coat. "Frank," she said softly. "Frank, you should hear this." She stepped in and her eyes held the kind of loyalty that doesn't ask to be thanked. "Adam's calling Nora's investors, saying you're unstable, that you're a risk. Megan's pushing the lawsuit angle hard." My jaw set and then relaxed because I could feel my pulse, and it was steady. "They're scared," I said. "The truth is out, and they're losing ground." Margaret nodded. "They're meeting an investor tomorrow morning. You'll need to act before lunch if you want to get ahead of it." A memory edged in months back in Adam's office when I'd brought a birthday card. A spreadsheet sat on his desk. A few lines were enough. The proceeds from my old house sale had gone to his startup, not into the trust he'd promised to set up in my name. I had stood there, the card in my hand like a paper anchor. Should I have confronted him then? With only a glance and no copy, I knew he'd wave it away. I waited for leverage and hated myself later for the patience. Those numbers were a betrayal in neat font. I had let it pass then. Now I could put it to use. "They underestimate you," Margaret said, firm as a handrail. "What's your plan?" I tapped the pen. "I'll show them who's steady and who's spinning." "Thank you, Margaret. Keep this between us." She nodded and left with a click that sounded like a line being drawn. I read the lawyer letter again and saw a date last spring, the same period they told the committee I was unavailable for the prize. A mistake, maybe, or a thread begging to be pulled. The room held its breath. They'd overplayed. I felt it. I was ready to tug hard. Could this be their slip? The day after Margaret's visit, I packed my handful of things. The key to Nora's cottage warmed my pocket like a coin someone had pressed into my hand and dared me to spend. She insisted I move in. It's your home, Frank, at least, while we build. Within the week, with her backing and a portion of the Heritage Prize finally paid after we rooted out the truth, I repurchased our family home and placed it where no one could misplace it again, into a trust with my name on it and language no one could bend. I invited council members, neighbors, reporters, and friends to the cottage. It was time to give the truth a room of its own and end Adam's games where they started, in public. February kept its white grip on the coast. Firelight danced over polished wood as I welcomed people in. The cottage smelled of salt and coffee and something like a second chance. My borrowed blazer felt like a kind of armor that doesn't pretend to be iron. I stood straighter than I had in a decade and greeted each face, grateful without performing gratitude. Seashell lamps threw soft pools. Glasses chimed. They had come because news travels faster when it carries both scandal and hope. Everyone, I said, and the room quieted in a way that told me they wanted to hear not just the facts, but how I'd come to hold them. Thank you. Because of Nora's backing and a portion of the Heritage Prize finally released once the record was set right, I raised what I needed to reclaim our family home. With Nora's help, I bought back the house I sold for Adam's dreams. Murmurs swelled. A woman dabbed her eye. It's in a trust now beyond anyone's reach but mine. Adam stood near Megan with his head lowered. His suit had stopped fitting the way it was supposed to. Megan clutched her purse, and the leather showed small crescents where her nails had pressed. The deed seal gleamed on the table, and even the skeptical eyes recognized what stamped paper means in the world. I'm leading the historic center reconstruction, I said steady. But I'm offering Adam and Megan a chance. Transparency, real repair, family therapy. A way to put this right without pretending nothing happened. I kept my tone level. Winning is easy if all you count is points. Peace is harder. It counts people. A councilman clapped first, and the sound was joined by others until it filled the small rooms. You've outmaneuvered them, Frank, he said. Cedar Falls is lucky to have you. Adam's voice came in low, hollowed out. We'll try, Dad. Megan nodded, eyes down, heat gone from her cheeks. I thought of Laura's hand in that hospital room, warm and weakening at the same time. Keep our family whole, she'd whispered. I promised. And that night at the cottage, I let myself believe I had honored both her mercy and her memory. Not with revenge, with justice. Nora's hand found my arm and squeezed. You did it, she whispered. The reporter scribbled. The murmurs turned to conversation. Glasses chimed the way small bells do when a door opens. I lifted my glass and met Adam's eyes across the room. To new beginnings, I said. His gaze held a fragile truce, and just for a second, the boy who had once believed beams were stories. The cottage door stood open to the winter air and the warmth inside. Years felt lighter, as if they had been set somewhere safe for a while. Could we rebuild what had broken and not simply plaster over it? Sun poured through the cottage windows. The sea murmured steady beyond the panes as I laid blueprints across the dining table. Driftwood shelves held old books whose spines had softened into my palms over time. A flannel shirt fit me better than any suit, and I liked how it let me forget I was supposed to impress anyone who didn't already know me. It was March 2025. I had settled into Nora's home, and the historic center took shape under my hands with a rhythm that felt like breath. The doorbell rang clear and welcome. Adam and Megan stood on the porch with their coats shrugged too quickly off the cold. I invited them in. Adam held a small gift, a leather-bound journal, an unsure but decent gesture. Megan's voice had lost its edge. We started therapy, Adam said and glanced up. It's a step. He paused, searching for words. After the article and talking to the investors, we saw we were losing more than control. We don't want to be left out, Dad. The boy in him was afraid of emptiness in a way the man couldn't admit. I poured coffee and put the mugs in their hands, like a first tool on the first day of a job. I'm glad, I said, calm and firm. Trust takes time. We'll see. I had stepped into my own place in this story again. They would have to earn their way back into theirs. They nodded. Megan's fingers still found her purse strap. Adam's shoulders finally loosened a notch. I thought of a sunny afternoon long ago, Laura's scarf catching light while we dreamed about Adam's future, without knowing where the turns were. We wanted him to soar, but not on a broken wing. Nora joined us, her presence filling in the hollows of the room with something that felt like mercy. It's a start, she said, setting out a small plate of cookies, because sometimes you have to put sweetness on the table on purpose. A gull cried outside and we spoke. Not about the lawsuit or the headlines, but about ordinary things that don't make stories, unless you're the one who's been starved of them. Small steps, no grand promises. Later on the porch, Nora and I stood side by side and watched the horizon take a deep breath of light. Her fingers brushed mine. It was a quiet promise nothing to flash at anyone. I lifted my mug and watched the gold move across the water. To balance, I said softly. What lay ahead was ours to shape. For the first time in years, that felt like enough. If this story resonated with you, tap like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for listening.